So this is a short presentation about adaptation in the writing situation with a stab at trying to define what rhetoric is. We're looking at the Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert staged Rally to Restore Sanity and/or Fear, and I've given you a link to the website on the readings page. And also Jon Stewart's final speech at the rally, I've given you a link to the video. I'd like you to compare those with anything that you care to look at from The Daily Show and The Colbert Report, both of which are shows on Comedy Central. When you look at the rhetorical situation, you look at a bunch of different things, different variables. One of the things we look at is choices of language, tone and diction. Tone and diction are reflected in the words we choose. And as you think about the way a writer or a rhetor, a person who's using rhetoric, might address an audience, you can think about the ways that the language that they choose would specifically affect the audience that they're addressing. So in the case of the Stewart-Colbert rally, they're largely dealing with people who are much like them, who share some of their points of view. And so they can mock people or make fun of, to a certain extent, people who disagree, but only to a certain extent because, they're also trying to include people. They're trying to move them into a more moderate stance. So the language choices range from satiric and comic choices to more serious ones and language that might bring people in to the fold. We can also look at the ways that writers document their evidence and the ways that they use evidence. This will change depending on the rhetorical situation. I think we can assume that all writers use evidence, they use sources, they're reflecting the sources that are around them. Now the speech that I asked you to look at is, of course, an oral text, although you can find a transcript of it. So it doesn't necessarily make a great deal of use of specific sources, but you can see that it refers to sources. For instance, when Stewart says, look, I can't control what people think this was, and I can only tell you my intentions, he's referring to a larger context in which people assumed and widely reported that the rally was a response to the Glenn Beck rally, Restoring Honor, that was in the previous August. So he's referring out to those kinds of representations of the Rally to Restore Sanity and/or Fear event, and making reference so that people understand. He understands how people are seeing the event. And excuse me, another event or variable that rhetors have to control for is styles of argumentation. Now, in a comic piece like this, you can expect to see the strategies of satire, which, as I said, are to exaggerate, to mock, or make fun of. And this is partly just, to make people laugh, obviously, but also to make a serious point. We can look at the more formal strategies of argumentation, such as the Toulmin strategy, which is if I have a claim that I want to make and I want to support it with evidence, that's a Toulminian strategy. And if I look at people who disagree with me and I marshal evidence that shows why their point of view is not valid or less valid than my own, that's also Toulminian. And the Rogerian strategy is based on the idea of finding common ground between disagreeing people. So for instance, I think if you look at this passage that I've got here, you can see a little bit of evidence of all kinds. There's a little bit of exaggeration, but there's also a common ground idea. That is to say, the American people, all people, on a daily basis, try to work together. So that's a common ground strategy, and to that extent, then, a Rogerian strategy. So in the rhetorical situation, a rhetor, that is a writer or a speaker, is analyzing and sizing up the audience and trying to make choices that will engage that audience and bring the audience along while still maintaining his or her own purpose. To that extent, then, rhetoric is generally in words, primarily verbal. It's contingent on situations. Situations change our rhetorical strategies. And it's an epistemic art. It shapes what we know. And it is practical as well as philosophical, and it gives rise to potentially active texts. That is, texts that try to do something in the world. So now that you've looked at this presentation and done the reading, you should go to Post 2A and post your thoughts about this and engage in a discussion with your peers.